Perfect. Are we good to go? We're good to go? Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll continue with the commentary on the first 21 hadith from the collection of Imam Nawawi, Arba'in Nawawi, the 40 Nawawi hadith. There are 42 in general, they're not actually 40, but that's how Arabs go by their numbers, so 42 is close enough. So we'll be going through the first 21, and we've covered the first 4. Today we'll do 5 and 6, inshallah ta'ala. Next week I'm away, so we're going to aim to do this session on a Sunday at 5. We'll confirm if you're a student, and if you're in the Google Classroom, then you'll find the confirmation, inshallah, there. We're just working things out, I think, with the brothers and sisters here to make sure that it's possible to run it during that time. And there'll be an extra session also on a Sunday at 5 in the future as well, just so that we can get 10 sessions in, which will be what we need to finish all 21 hadith, inshallah ta'ala. But for sure, next Wednesday is not running. We will, yeah.
Next Sunday?
So not this one coming up, but the one. So this week, this session is basically done for this week. Next week I'm not around, so the Sunday after we'll probably do that. But you need we'll confirm that in the Google Classroom, and we'll probably put it in the WhatsApp group for the NWN announcements if you're not in the Google Classroom for this course, so you know exactly when and where it's running, because I'm still just waiting for confirmation in terms of the setup and the time and everything, inshallah ta'ala. But yeah, we'll make sure you guys are aware. So we went through the first 4 hadith. I'm not going to go back to number 4. You're going to have to read the Qada and Qadr piece on your own, and I'll probably attach a link to the slides with one of the lectures that I did on that topic specifically, so that if you want to kind of make sure you have a better understanding of the aspect of Qada and Qadr and science within Revelation, so you have a little bit of ideas to go by, inshallah ta'ala. You can go back to that. Just for sake of time, we'll move on. So hadith number 5 in the collection of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah. يقول الإمام رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه عن أم المؤمنين أم عبد الله عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد رواه البخاري ومسلم وفي رواية لمسلم من عمل عملا ليس عليه أمرنا فهو رد. So this is a very, very famous hadith, and I'm sure you've heard it many times in your life. And I'm going to take a little bit of time and make sure that we go through aspects of it that are important. So muttafaq alayh, so it's narrated both in Bukhari and Muslim. You can see how Imam al-Nawawi here actually pointed out when he felt like the difference in narration between Muslim's and Bukhari's narration was big enough, he also put in the narration of Imam Muslim. And that's what I was trying to explain over the last 2 sessions, that sometimes the same hadith will be narrated in different collections by the same chain, but will just have some differences because the recollection of the people who are narrating it may be a little different. So you'll have some differences. So here's the differences are actually are reasonable enough that Imam Nawawi wanted to actually put the second narration. So man ahdatha fi amrina instead of man amila amalan. That's a little bit of a different wording altogether. So he just wanted to add that second narration to his collection. And the wording is man ahdatha, al-ihdathu. The word ahdath means someone who brings something new. Causes something new. They use the same word for breaking your wudu, for doing something, and basically you technically produce something new, and so it all comes under the same, basically under the same umbrella. I don't want to spend too much time in the linguistics so I don't bore you, but that's where ihdath comes from. So ihdath is to bring something new in terms of behaviors or outcomes or effects. So man ahdatha fi amrina, and he uses the word fi amrina, which is an important point to kind of hold on to. He doesn't say fi dinina alayhi salatu wasalam. He didn't say fi sunnati. He said fi amrina, regarding our matter, regarding our matter in general, which broadens the scope of what this hadith is talking about quite a bit, because any other usage of wording would change things. And the interesting part is that if you go to the different narrations of this hadith, you'll find different wordings here and there. But this word is the same. This word is amruna. It's always amruna or amrina. It's always our matter. Sorry, our affair is another word maybe to explain it. أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه, that which is not of it or from it, فهو رد is going to be rejected. رد from someone who does ridda, irtad, meaning apostasy, meaning go back. There's a rejection involved. So this hadith is important because it's the title hadith for a topic that we all understand as the word bid'ah. And this is a big word in our deen. It's important to understand. It's important to understand for many different reasons, and I'm going to go through a quick explanation of what you need to know about it. Obviously, covering the whole topic in a session or two is not enough, but I do want to make sure you have basic understandings of it. The Prophet ﷺ said this, and al-Mu'mineen Aisha is the one who narrated it. Because in order for a faith or an ideology to be protected, there has to be parameters. There has to be limits to what you can bring into it. And when you talk about innovation or you talk about creativity, there has to be some degree, there has to be some parameters in order for the ideology to continue to be what it is originally. This is not a novel thought or novel idea. Any ideology historically, in order for it to maintain the integrity of the origin of it, or the originality of it, they have to put parameters in place. If you don't put parameters, then the human experience has always been that if you like an idea, you take it, and you have no limits and there's no borders or boundaries anywhere, that you'll just walk with it, and slowly you'll kind of move it until you're in a very different, a couple of centuries later, you're in a different position than where you were initially, or what the purpose of that ideology was to begin with. And this is across the board. Every movement in history has always started out one way and then turned out a couple of decades or centuries later another way. And I don't need to give you examples, but you can just go look at anything at all, any movement at all, historically, that started and was popular when it began, meaning the person who led it was a person of great status and very respected, and the ideas were amazing. Look at the same ideology a couple of centuries later. It's changed to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. It's not the same thing. And even countries are that way. The West is a good example. The West was built on a really beautiful idea, the idea of freedoms. And it was central to their ideology. And the whole world, that's what everyone should be focusing on. And now it's shifted to something that's very different than that. It's almost completely lost what that actually means in its essence because of the lack of parameters. So the Prophet ﷺ, by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made sure there were parameters put in place to protect Islam, not to kill creativity. Not to kill creativity or innovation in its good sense, but to make sure that the deen is protected from losing sight of its basic purposes and the principles and the values that it carries and the practices that define it. And that's extremely important. Without that system in place, Islam with that system in place, depending on where you go, you'll find practices that are very foreign to what what makes sense or what is logical altogether. You'll find practices and concepts and understandings and comprehensions of Islam that are very, very foreign and weird and completely far away from what the Quran is actually teaching. The reason being is that even with that system put in place, we still had a lot of deviation from the norm, from the basics. So this is why this hadith is important to understand because of that significance. But also, this hadith has also been completely misused. This hadith has been used. This is the hammer hadith, as one of my teachers used to call it. It's just anything you don't like, you just hammer the guy with this one, and then they have to step back because he said it, alayhi salatu wasalam, Bukhari Muslim, and you love him, you respect him. And it was overused over a number of decades. Every time someone opened their mouth and came up with an idea that may serve a purpose within a community that is suffering, the Prophet ﷺ did not necessarily do exactly per se, word for verbatim, or do exactly the same way, then that is going to be seen as something that is negative and should be got rid of. And neither of these extremes are what this hadith is talking about, and neither of them are acceptable or correct. It's figuring out that fine balance is what we're going to. So I want to go through a little bit the hadith, the understanding of what bid'ah is, and then I'll go back to this hadith for a few moments. And I don't expect you to become a scholar on this topic. I don't want you to teach you something that you're going to go use and start arguing with people all over the globe regarding the issue. This is for your understanding, so that you can comprehend how to view things. We must protect our deen from deviation, from innovation that is not based on sound evidence and sound logic. At the same time, we have to keep doors open so that we are able to move forward as a community, as an ummah, because our needs change based on where we are and when we are and how we are. So the word sunnah. This is taken from lectures I give on a completely different topic, but I just pulled the slides because I thought they would be helpful for you for this one. So the word sunnah is used sometimes as to refer to everything that relates to what he did, said, accepted, rejected. You can do this sunnah just to say about what was narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. So all the recorded narrated sayings, actions, reactions, we can use the word sunnah. So when you say Al-Quran was sunnah, what you're saying is the Quran al-Kareem, all the verses, and the sunnah is everything that, all the narrations that we have about him ﷺ, which is what we're studying, which is what hadith is. Right? That's basically what hadith is. You can use the word sunnah. Sunnah is a very versatile word. It has 6 different meanings. I have 3 that are important. The other 3 we talk about in a different course altogether. But the second one is a ruling in contrast to being something is wajib or a fard, something is obligatory, and then something is permissible. In between them, you have something that is recommended. We use the word sunnah. You can use the word mandub as well, and mustahab, but the word sunnah is used as well. So when you say the word sunnah, you have to figure out what are you talking about. You're talking about everything that he ever said, did, or are you talking about the actual ruling, or are you talking about it in contrast or against, as in against bid'ah? And when it's against bid'ah, then what we're talking about is his way of life, alayhi salatu wassalam. Amruna. When he said amruna, our matter. Okay, what was his matter, alayhi salatu wassalam? It was the way he lived, and the way he practiced Islam, and how he did things. So anything that is against that is called bid'ah, and that's why I put it even in that lecture, as in when you talk about sunnah, sometimes it can be just an against that. But it doesn't necessarily, when you use it in contrast to bid'ah, you don't mean all of this. You just mean that this is not his way, alayhi salatu wasalam. That wasn't his way. Way is different than that's not what he did. All right? Way is different than action. So when you say that wasn't, when I say this is not his way, alayhi salatu wasalam, it doesn't mean that it's not equal to saying that's not what he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, because he didn't do a lot of things that we do on a daily basis. So that definition is very weak and doesn't really hold a candle. It's not something you can use for debate. So what you're looking at is that's not how he would have done it, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is not what he would have wanted in this context. That's not the way he would have solved the problem in the circumstances that we're living in. Now that requires an extremely profound understanding of how he was, alayhi salatu wasalam. That requires a very profound understanding of his character, of his knowledge, of how he saw things. So it's not just, so it's your ability to, so you follow him, alayhi salatu wasalam. And I did a full series on this. You can follow him in his appearance, you can follow him in his rituals, but then there's the intellectual fallowship of the Prophet alayhi salam. Understanding how he viewed the world, his world perspective, his attitude, his outlook, how he understood things, because it's through, when you appreciate that, you can understand how he thought and how he processed things. And if you do that, then when you're stuck in a situation, you have an idea of he probably would have looked at it this way, and you have evidence to support that as well. So it's not his way, it's different than he didn't do it. And so don't equate them, they're not exactly the same. If you come up and say, well, did the Prophet ﷺ do this? That's not a good question. Your question should be, if he was in this situation, you think he would have done this. And any scholar who's giving a fatwa or his answer by the merit of him doing it is, yeah, he thought that based on his understanding, the Prophet ﷺ would do it. So what is the definition? This is the definition Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, or Asqalani, rahmatullah alayh. And I really like it. It's probably the best one out there. And there's a lot of definitions for the word bid'ah, by the way. A lot of definitions. So كل إحداث ليس له أصل عام ولا خاص في الشرع. It's every newly invented matter that does not have any basis in Islamic legislation, whether in general or in specific. ليس له أصل. It has no basis. It doesn't have a general basis or a specific basis within Islamic law. This is how he defined, rahmatullah alayh, the word bid'ah. And that makes sense. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment and explain to you. So there are 2 opinions on the concept of bid'ah. Is there, and what I mean by this, when we say the word bid'ah, hasana, when we use that word, because that word is used, can there be an innovation that is acceptable? Or are all innovations completely unacceptable? Just by concept, is there a possibility of there being an innovation, a bid'ah, that could be good? Or are they all going to be, just by definition of them being new, going to be bad? So there's 2 two opinions here. The Imam Shafi'i, Nawawi, Ibn al-Izz, Ibn Abd al-Salam, Ibn Hajar, al-Qarafi, al-Maliki, they use that word in their books, meaning they would use that term, they accepted that term. Other scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, Imam al-Shatibi in al-Muwafaqat and al-I'tisam, he doesn't accept the word, he doesn't think it's acceptable. So there's two opinions on this matter in terms of the usage of bid'ah and adding to it a description by saying there's a bad one and a good one. So not all scholars accept that there's a distinction here, but some do. In general, all agree that the word bid'ah is used to describe an acceptable innovation within the wordings of the Prophet ﷺ. Which a good question is do we have this concept in the Quran? When we talk about innovation, for example, or bid'ah, is it in the Quran? It's a trivia question. Anyone know? Is it in the Quran? Yeah, that's the only one. So the only example that we have is وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً إِبْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ رِضْوَانِ اللَّهِ in Surah Al-Hadeeth. And I'll give you the context in a moment because it's an important one. The second time it's used is قُلْ مَا كُنْتُ بِدْعًا مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. That's the only other time. And that he's saying, I didn't make something up. I didn't bring a way of life that is different from all the prophets before me. I am following the teachings of everyone who came before me. So I didn't innovate in terms of law, which is another usage. There's only two times. But when he ever used it, alayhi salatu wasalam, in his hadith, it was always referring to an innovation that is unacceptable. And acceptable innovation is called sunnah hasana. And if you want to take a word that everyone agrees to, all everyone agrees to, you can use the word sunnah hasana. So if you want to get out of terminology wars, bid'ah is used to describe an innovation that is negative, and sunnah hasana is used to describe an innovation or a way that is good or that is positive and helpful. So Imam al-Shatibi, he defines it a little bit differently. I don't know why the translation didn't show up for this one. It's طريقة في الدين مخترعة تضاهي الشرعية يقصد بالسلوك عليها المبالغة في التعبد لله سبحانه وتعالى. And I want to use his definition because he rejected the concept of it ever being good. But then listen to how he defined it, because you'll figure out why people think the way they think when you figure out their definitions, how they understand things and their outlooks. So Imam al-Shatibi, the way he defined it was that it's a way in Islam that is made up. It is being treated as if it is authentic, even though it is not. And people who do it are doing it with the intention of trying to over-worship. They want to worship more than what the Prophet ﷺ was doing. That's how he defines it. So when he refuses the concept of a bid'ah ever being good, it's because this is his definition of it. Because you can't take this and define it. So what examples do we have? And I think did I put some examples here? Okay, maybe we'll come back to this in a second. So, examples we have from the Prophet ﷺ's time, the example of the three guys who, one said, I will pray all night and never sleep. The other one said, I will fast every day and never eat. And the third one said, I will never get married, so I'm not distracted. So that's what he decided to do. So these three guys made these oaths. So the Prophet ﷺ heard of this. There's a hadith in Imam Ahmad, Imam Muslim's collection. And he calls upon them. And he says, أَلَا إِنِّي أَتْقَاكُمْ لِلَّهِ وَأَخْشَاكُمْ لَهُ. No one has more piety or reverence of Allah or has a better way of life than myself. He wasn't bragging. He was trying to explain, I'm here to teach you, not for you to try and top me. If you do that, you're going to end up going in the wrong direction. It's not because he wants to be the best, alayhi sallam. It's because he's bringing forward the example that we have to follow. If he opens up in terms of makes it a competition, then we end up going in a completely different direction altogether. So explain, no, don't try and do more. Just try to do try to do this. وَإِنِّي أَصُومُ وَأُفْطِرُ. And I fast and break my fast some days. وَإِنِّي أَنَامُ وَأُصَلِّي. And some nights I sleep through and sometimes I pray. وَإِنِّي أَتَزَوَّجُ النِّسَاء. And I get married. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Those who refuse my sunnah, my way, is not going to be seen amongst me. So the first time bid'ah kind of happened was someone who decided to over-worship. They want to go beyond what the Prophet ﷺ had explained in a way that would, and this is my definition of it, and I don't want to write it, I've coined it, but I'm not going to put it up here for this dars because it'll become too much of a discussion. But it has to be something that's going to ruin functionality. Meaning you're over-worshipping in a way that's going to take away your ability to function properly. If you fast every day, you're going to get very weak and you're going to become incapable of doing your job during the day if every day you fast. If you don't sleep at night, same thing. If you don't get married, if everyone did that, there would be the human race would end within a generation. So it has to be something that also ruins functionality. Why am I saying that? Because the usage of it in the Quran, I have no choice but to understand it that way. In the Quran, when the only time it's used at the end of Surah Al-Hadeeth, a surah that basically balances for us spirituality and materialism. That's the whole point of the surah. You can go back to, I have maybe 15 lectures on, to see it in both English and Arabic. You can listen to them if you like. And there's a surah summary if you want to go and understand what the surah talks about. But it basically balances spirituality and materialism, that they have to come hand in hand. Neither of them should be stronger or above the other. They have to come together. And at the end of that surah that's explaining it, it pointed out that Isa ثُمَّ قَفَّيْنَا عَلَى آثَارِهِمْ بِرُسُولِنَا وَقَفَّيْنَا بِعِيسَى بْنِ مَرْيَمَ. I mean, we sent all these prophets and we sent with them guidance and hadith. Spiritual guidance and hadith, strength, ways to defend themselves. And we sent them like that. And we sent Isa ibn Maryam with the same thing. وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْإِنْجِيلَ, and we gave him the Bible, the New Testament. وَجَعَلْنَا فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُ رَأْفَةً وَرَحْمَةً. And we put in the hearts of those who followed him a certain degree of tenderness, a certain degree of rahmah or compassion. And then وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً إِبْتَدَعُوهَ. And then they made up and they added something, rahbaniyya. Rahbaniyya is full chastity. There's a word for it. Where's Hamu? Hamu's not here to save me. There's a word for this in English, and I can't think of it. Where, of course, you swear yourself to celibacy. Yes, is it celibacy? That's the only word? Okay. So, وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً إِبْتَدَعُوهَا. My mom saved me. وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً إِبْتَدَعُوهَا. And celibacy that was made up, that they basically came up with, that has no basis in the deen. مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. We did not decree this upon them. إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ رِضْوَانِ اللَّهِ. Because we wanted them only to do things that would please their Lord. فَمَا رَعَوْهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. And they couldn't keep up with it anyways. What was the biggest problem that the Catholic Church has? And where did it come from? Do you think sexually starved priests had nothing to do with the problems that they ended up dealing with? You would be insane not to think that. Of course, if people enter into the service of God and they're sexually starved, meaning they're not allowed to ever. Of course, there's going to be behaviors that are going to deviate away from what is haqq. So whenever you decide to do something more than what He explains, subhanahu wa ta'ala, just wait. Wait and see how it runs people right into a brick wall. Because He knows what He's teaching, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't make anything up. What you're given, in another hadith is a sahabi, his name is Abu Israel, interestingly enough. And hadith in Bukhari. And he was found standing in the middle, at Jumu'ah time, he was standing outside in the sun. So the Prophet ﷺ saw him as he's going to Jumu'ah, so he asked someone, what is he doing? فقال نذر أو أقسم أن يقف ولا يجلس وأن يقف في الشمس وأن يصوم. He swore that he's going to fast and stand up and not sit down and be in the sun for the sake of Allah. فقال مروه فليجلس وليستظل وليتم صومه. Tell him that he should sit in the shade and continue his fasting. So he corrected it for him. Fasting, continue. The other two, no need. Where did you hear that we have to stand in the sun to bring ourselves closer to God? He never asked for that, so we don't do that. It's not something that we are required to do. So these are the examples of bid'ah that we have in our deen. These are the examples that we have in our deen, and they're very important. It's important to understand. So some controversial modern examples. So post-prayer, for example, group supplication. When people, if you go to certain parts of the world, especially if you come to Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey, after Salah, the Imam will make a dua and everyone will say Ameen with them, or maybe after Tahajjud or something during Ramadan. Not during Salah, but after Salah, for example. End of meeting, Surah Al-Asr recitation. If you go to any masjid in the Middle East after Surah Al-Fajr, everyone goes around and they give salam to each other and recite Surah Al-Asr, and then they walk away. Invocation gatherings, when people come together and they do dhikr together, whether it's quiet or loud. Offering the reward of deeds to the Prophet ﷺ. When you do something good and you want to offer, these are issues of difference of opinion. Celebrating the Prophet ﷺ's birthday, for example, the concept of the Mawlid, and of course the annual war that has to occur every year online that takes up most of the internet for a couple of weeks. Every single year we celebrate his birthday ﷺ by fighting online over whether it's okay to celebrate his birthday or not, and it's going on for 700 years or more. These are controversial modern examples. I'm not interested, by the way, of even telling you what I think about any of these things. But these are examples of issues that people continue to fight about. If you understand what I'm trying to explain to you, meaning if you understand that a bid'ah has to be something that has no basis in Islam whatsoever. Has to have no basis. Standing in the sun has no basis in Islam. Where do you find that? Where did the Prophet ﷺ ever say that you need to go and subject yourself to a heat stroke in order for you to be closer to God? Yeah? Where is celibacy in the Quran? Where is it as a concept? It's not, these things aren't there. So it has to have no asl, it has to have no basis in our deen. And it has to be something that's going to ruin functionality, and it has to be something that is being said that this is equal to our deen. It's authentic, it's original, it's the same thing. It's as if the Prophet ﷺ did it. These are the stuff that has to exist in order for us to call it a bid'ah. If these things don't exist, then we have to be a little bit careful when we throw the word around. It's a big word. The word bid'ah is a big word. It's a very heavy one, right? Throwing it around, using it. I grew up in a place where it was like bizarre. It's just like you're saying, you can say it to anything. Anything you don't like is a bid'ah. It's a big deal. وَكُلُّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ وَكُلُّ ضَلَالَةٍ وَصَاحِبُهَا إِلَى النَّارِ. A bid'ah will deviate you, and a deviation will take you to Jahannam. So it's a big deal if you're going to make the accusation and point out that this is a bid'ah. It obviously is needed. I'm not saying it's not needed. 100% it is needed. It is there to protect our deen. Hands down, you have to have these parameters. I cannot emphasize that enough. But if the word becomes something that you use every time someone does something you don't fully agree with, or anytime someone does something that the Prophet ﷺ did not do exactly during his time, then we're running into problems. In my opinion, only people of scholarship should be talking about you use this word. I have been giving durus for 20 plus years. I have never used the word. Anyone here who's listened to me talk for the last 10 years, when have you heard me use this word aside from today? I never use it. It's very rare. In order for me to use this word, it has to be a big deal. It has to be a case study. I have to bring in other people. We have to look at this new behavior that makes no sense, that has no basis, that is ruining functionality, that is actually going against something the Prophet ﷺ said specifically not to do. That's not something that's common. There are examples in the world. I'm not saying there aren't, but it's not very common. Establishing papacy in Islam. That's a bid'ah. If you decide that Islam is not based on evidence anymore, it's not based on arguing evidence and who has a better argument, it's going to be based on blood lineage or based on a specific person who's going to tell us what to do and we all do it, that is made up. We don't have it in our deen. Yes? Oh, the Pope? Ever heard the Pope? Yeah. So the concept of papacy is when you have someone who continues to have a direct link or who has a direct connection to God. I mean, God continues to do something. Maybe it's not full revelation, but it's close enough that there's no need for us to sit down and argue the evidence. We can just ask him, and he'll just say, well, I waited for it, and it came to me in a dream, and I'll give you an example. An example of this historically. So there was you know how at the end of Ramadan, we look for the Hilal for Eid. So the night of the 30th of Ramadan, they look. It was the beginning of Ramadan. Sorry, it was the beginning of Ramadan, or what was it? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. But they look and they can't see. Yes, they can't see. It's the end of Ramadan. They can't see. So when the ghumma alaykum, when you cannot see the moon, if everyone gets together and it's too cloudy, what do? فَأَتِمُّوا 30. You continue 30 days, and then you go. So the judge, he went out with his group. They looked up. They spent all night. It was cloudy. They couldn't see anything. So they said, "Nutim 30." A man who slept early that night came up and said, "I saw the Prophet ﷺ in my dream, and he told me that tomorrow is Eid." And he started this fitna. So this judge quickly said, "I saw the Prophet ﷺ outside of my dream. I was awake, and he told me tomorrow is Ramadan." So everyone calmed down. So the guy who saw him in his dream came and said, "What are you? Obviously you're lying." He said, "Well, I'm not going to say you're obviously lying, but I'll say this. You saw him in your dream. What I followed is a direct narration from him, which is equivalent to me seeing him during the day. He said very clearly, when this is the case, is what you do. So what I have is way more important than what you have." And I'm just giving you an example that this happened, and it continues to happen, where people claim that they have a connection to get a little bit ahead of people because they become holy and they become sacred. I don't have that in Islam. And has it been established in Islam? Of course. There are groups that's how they do it. All form of evidence-based arguments in Islam don't exist anymore. It's just whatever this person says in terms of how you're going to practice your deen moving forward, which makes no sense, which is a bid'ah. Right? It's not kufr. See, kufr is different. Kufr is when you leave Islam altogether. Yeah? Bid'ah is when you make something up that doesn't exist. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Once I'm gone, there's no more revelation." And he taught people how to perform qiyas and how to perform istidlal. And he trained the Sahaba to learn how to come up with fatwa when they didn't have the answer. So you go ahead and you establish something that does not exist in the deen. That's a bid'ah. Inflicting self-harm. Huh? When if you're going to harm yourself or bleed, or this isn't. Where is this? And he explained, this is a bid'ah. You made something up. It doesn't exist in our deen. The Prophet ﷺ never said inflict harm upon yourself in order to worship God. Ever. Not once. He said sometimes the road will be rough as you strive for the sake of Allah. But none of our acts of worship have within them the concept of inflicting harm upon oneself. Actually, if you can't pray properly because it's painful or it's going to hurt you, then you pray sitting down. And if not sitting down, then lying down. And if not, then with your eyes, whatever you need to do. Because salamatul abdan muqaddamatun ala sihhatil adyan. Because the wellness and the health of your body is 1 degree higher than the wellness of your ritual. Your ritual can be fine. If it's missing a few pillars, it'll survive to make sure that you are healthy. So the concept of inflicting harm, it's not kufr again, but it's the same thing. Now you've made something up. So inventing rules to benefits of groups, specifying new holy places. These are just examples that exist today. And these are bid'ah. These are made up stuff that we don't have any evidence for this, and it's actually, it ruins functionality. This ruins functionality. This takes away what Islam is built on, which is the logical methodology of deriving rulings from argument-based evidence-based arguments. This is what Islam is doing. So when you take this away, then it's gone. It's just a dude. It's a person just says something based on what. Same thing goes for inflicting harm. When you self-harm, I don't need to explain to you how that's a problem, etc., etc. Okay. So bid'ah versus controversial ijtihad. I'll talk about this today. I'll talk about this next week as well. Yeah.
So a lot of us are familiar with celibacy and papacy and,
Yeah.
and the other one, self-hurting with the Catholic
Yeah.
beliefs. But I know that our brothers and sisters in Shiaism also do.
Yeah.
So how do
It's a bid'ah, for sure.
but how do they accept?
Because they have a papacy in their because they did establish the papacy for themselves. Similar, not exactly the same way. They don't have a pope, but they do have someone who they look to, who basically gives rulings, not necessarily based on evidence. They don't need arguments. So that's why we differ with them on certain things. This is where we differ. We differ on some of these things that we clearly see as deviations. A bid'ah, the best word for it in English is a deviation. It's a very clear deviation that has no basis for it within Islamic law. And it's something that does not have a basis, general or specific, and it ruins functionality. And it can cause the deen to actually morph go into a direction where it's not identifiable anymore. So yeah, this is why that's why, Wallahu a'lam, historically, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and all the other groups there were these lines, these borders, or their boundaries. It's because of this. It's because of these bid'ah that existed, these behaviors that are, again, they're not kufr. They don't leave Islam because of it, but they are problematic because they change the nature of Islam with time, which is what we can see. We can say Islam for many of them is not exactly the same as it is for us, or actually very different on many, many levels and many degrees. So when you talk about bid'ah versus controversial ijtihad, they're not the same. I'll talk about this a little bit more next week in the hadith that we'll run through. But they're not the same. A scholar who performed an ijtihad, a scholar who actually looked at evidence for a specific problem that people are dealing with, and came up with a fatwa or an answer, and the ijtihad that he made is not something that everyone agrees to, or not everyone thinks is right. That is not equal to bid'ah. It's just an opinion in fiqh that you don't agree with. It's an opinion in fiqh. If this person is taking evidence and arguing these pieces of evidence and explaining the logic of why this answer makes more sense or makes sense to him, and he offers this as an ijtihad, it's not equal to bid'ah because it's based on a specific argument, or at least evidence is being used. So be careful. Be careful when you are, when you're listening to certain labels being applied to certain things. You have to know whether this is actually a deviation and of course this isn't a controversial topic. I can't, break that. I'm not going to fix the ummah with regarding this, or maybe people's understanding of it, which is fine. But I'm just giving you things to watch out for. When you hear the word, make sure that, because it could be an ijtihad, and some ijtihadat are controversial when they happen, and they're not controversial 100 years later. Like a lot of what the scholars did at the beginning when they did it was called names, and later on, people picked up on the fatwa or the rationale itself, and that's very, very well known. If you go and study history, you'll see what people called Abu Hanifa for most of his life, rahmatullah alayh. Only after he died was he called an Imam al-Azam, the greatest Imam. Years after he died, did people recognize the effort he put in and what he actually did, and the benefit of it. During his life, no, he was never recognized for it during his life. Weak jurisprudence opinion is another example. You can have an old opinion that's in a book of fiqh. It's weak. It's not bid'ah. It's an opinion. It exists. It's a weaker opinion, meaning maybe even within the jurisprudence school, within the Shafi'i madhab, for example, or Hanafi madhab, it's there. but it's not necessarily the prominent opinion in that method, but it's an opinion, and it has an argument of a scholar, and it's documented in the books. That's not equal to bid'ah. They're different. It's a weaker opinion, for sure, but it's not the same thing as a bid'ah. Methods of self-purification. When people, this is probably the most difficult one to talk about. When we talk about aspects of tazkiyah and how people will do certain things, differentiating that from bid'ah is important, because when you perform acts of tazkiyah, you end up having to try certain exercises or do certain things that maybe the Sahaba did not do specifically, but because we have such less self-awareness maybe than other people do, that we have to end up trying certain stuff. For example, I run a number of circles, and I'll ask the guys or the girls as well to try things like, here, make dua. We think of someone you don't like. Now make dua for them and genuinely, sincerely, the way you should. Now, is that a bid'ah? Well, I'm not saying this is an act of worship. I'm not saying that the Prophet that's equal to the Prophet ﷺ's teachings. I'm saying that you need to learn something about yourself. Try and make dua for someone you don't like, right? And then you'll come with 5,000 questions that I'm not willing to answer any of. But you have to learn about yourself. Like, you have to figure out, why is it that I can't what is the connection between not liking someone and not being able to make a sincere dua for? And you learn something about yourself, and that's very valuable, because if you don't have self-awareness, there's no hope in Islam actually going anywhere. We have to have the concept of tazkiyah. So tazkiyah sometimes requires certain creative methods so people can learn a little bit more about themselves and do things that we don't have, not even a fraction of the amount of spirituality that the Muslims at the time of the Prophet ﷺ had, for many reasons. For the lack of his existence ﷺ as a number one, very obvious reason. He's not there, alayhi salatu anymore. And this is the biggest loss for all of us. We didn't get to spend time with him. And the authenticity of the knowledge, the way the community was functioning at the time. The simplicity of life. You don't think that the light pollution and the sound pollution and the technological pollution and causes difficulty. We can barely focus on anything for more than a couple of minutes before getting really, really bored. Go live in the country for a couple of months with no electricity and no gadgets, and see how every aspect of your whole being slows down a little bit, and you're much more focused, and you're capable of actually connecting with aspects of yourself you didn't know existed to begin with. I went on, used to go on tazkiyah camps. We go for a full week. They would take us to منطقة اسمها البسيمي في سوريا رحمة الله عليه. The Sheikh used to own like certain big establishments there. It'd just be rooms and a swimming pool and a lot of land. And you would eat like zaytun and za'atar and maybe a certain type of jam. That's it. That's all you during the day, 3 short times. And then you would go out and you would work, and then you would swim and qiyam al-layl and do siyam. And you go for a full week, and there was no electronics at all. So it was actually probably the most important thing that I ever did in my life. Like, you learn certain things about yourself that you'd never learn elsewhere or otherwise, because of the access you have. Now, you can call that a bid'ah. No, I don't think that's a bid'ah, because we're not claiming this is to be an act of worship. We're not saying that this is something that is fard, that everyone has to. No. We're saying that this is an activity that if you try, you may learn something about yourself, and you can learn to purify a little bit better, and maybe you can improve your functionality, improve your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that your salah is better. So you have to differentiate. That doesn't mean that we don't have groups that are doing crazy stuff in the name of the deen. No, there's still activities that have to be censored and talked about. But you have to understand that there's always going to be, that's going to be a part of this story, because people want to access that clarity and sincerity that the Sahaba had. We don't have that. We don't have it, so how do we get it? How do we, when they prayed, they were much more focused. They were close to Allah. They had khushu'. They didn't have to put too much effort into it. It just kind of came. What do we do? How many people pray and feel anything at all? How long can you put up with that before you completely lose hope in this and maybe move on to something else? So there has to be an effort doing that. So you have to sometimes come up with different ways of doing it. I'm just giving you understandings. Sin is not similar to bid'ah. A sin is one thing, a bid'ah is something else. Bid'ah is sinful, but they're not the same thing. A ma'asiyah is not a bid'ah. So very important in terms, because wording here matters a lot. And same thing over heresy. When someone does something that goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or removes themselves from Islam, or bid'ah is not the same. They're acts that remove you from the deen. They're not bid'ah. Bid'ah are deviations from the mainstream, from the main way, that have no basis in Islam, that ruin functionality, that try to top acts of worship, that claim that there are acts of worship or certain rituals the Prophet ﷺ did not tell us about or are better than what he told us about, that's not acceptable. You don't leave Islam because of it. It is sinful because it leads to a change, a deviation, and a morphing of what Islam is altogether. But be very careful before you throw the word around. Because when you throw the word around for something someone's doing, then you're basically calling them mubtadi'. And that's a big word. That's a big word. you have to carry that Yawm al-Qiyamah. You have to go and argue in front of God that, yeah, this guy is a mubtada, is a dal. He's someone who is mistreating people or misleading people. It's a big deal. So that's what I want to talk about regarding bid'ah. I'll end with that, inshallah. So when he says here in this hadith, "Man ahdatha fi amrina hada ma laysa minhu." See, he added this piece. Without this piece, this hadith would have a very different, I'll be giving you a very different talk. "Man ahdatha fi amri," someone who innovates something in our matter. "Ma laysa minhu," that is not of it. He said that has to, if you make what this means logically. "Man ahdatha fi amrina hada ma huwa minhu falaysa birad." That's what it means logically. He's saying if you make something up within our matter, within our deen, that does not have a basis in it, that is not a part of it, it's going to be rejected. But that means logically, just to understand that sentence, that if you come up with something within our matter that has a basis within it, it won't be rejected. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If you accept the hadith the way it is, then you have to accept all the logical follow-ups in terms of what it means, which is what scholars have argued for many years, which is why the concept of sunnah hasana, or sometimes needing to come up with something that's a little bit different to serve people is there. Go ahead.
I'm just a little bit confused. Who's the red? The red is the amr, or the red is the person who...
The rad is man ahdatha, is the ihdath. Is the ihdath. Yeah. No, not the person, the ihdath itself. Yeah, you can't do rad to a person, yeah.
So, in my head, there were three components for bid'ah. The first is that it's not min ad-din.
Yeah.
The second, that the Prophet and the Khulafa ar-Rashidin did not do, right? Or the Sahaba, for that matter, because the Sahaba knew what was right and what was wrong, so but they didn't do it. And now it's the third component that you said that, and I guess the third component about the functionality is what would distinguish what's good from what's hasan from what's not hasan. Because I've always had, to decide that a bid'ah is hasana. This is where the issue, where it's not clear in my mind. When do you say bid'ah is hasana?
Yeah, I don't think that within this talk I'm going to be able to give you the tools to do that. I honestly don't. It's in my opinion, it's a bit too complicated for us to walk out of here qualified to point out to certain behaviors and say this is a bid'ah hasana or it's not. I think the rule the general rule is that if it has a basis in our deen, meaning it's something that, and it's not something that is being very clearly said by the Prophet ﷺ that we shouldn't be doing, and it's not something that ruins functionality, then it can be argued. It can be considered. You need scholars to look into this a little bit more. If it doesn't have those three components, then just by default is going to be put aside. I don't think whether it's something that the Prophet ﷺ did or the Khulafa ar-Rashidin did is a good way of putting it, because it's not about doing, it's about the way. It's about the way, and there's two different things. When you say do it, then the action itself, you're taking an action, you're saying that actions do not require context. When you say it has to be something they did, then what you're arguing is that an action requires no context at all. And that's not practical within this world. The Prophet ﷺ did things within the context of what was happening around him at the time. So when we come to a new time, and we want to also establish the objectives that he established, meaning actually reach the goals and serve the purpose that he did, if we do the exact same thing in a completely different context, in my opinion, that may actually be a problem. Because you're doing exactly what he did, alayhi salatu wasalam, but are you achieving the goal? No, because the context is not the same. So doing something a little bit different that achieves the purpose within this context is actually what he would have done, alayhi salatu wasalam, if that makes sense to you. So when you define it as it's something that he didn't do or the Sahaba didn't do, you have now put us in a big problem, because I cannot tell you how different the context of the 7th century Arabia is to 2024 in Canada. The differences are on every level. They go into every depth of the human experience. It doesn't mean that we can't do certain things. No, I'm just saying that, and usually bid'ahs don't relate to aspects of clarity within Islam. Usually it's not about Salat al-Maghrib or Salat al-Isha, and no one's running around trying to add a rak'ah to something. It's usually on issues that are much more difficult to understand, or they're a little bit more technical. Usually tertiary within fiqh or within behaviors. But we have to be able to see that definition. And it's more of a way of thought or a way of behavior, not really something that was done versus not done. Because a lot of things he didn't do, alayhi salatu wasalam. Like a lot of things that we do today, and we do almost normally. We don't really feel it to be a problem because our minds, even without having an Islamic background, feel is not a problem. Like it doesn't seem to be a problem. And that's because that's true. Common sense is very helpful. But sometimes, in order for you to establish a ruling, you need more than just common sense. You need to have like a better understanding of the whole topic. So I don't want to go into it too much more deeper than this, because this is a never-ending topic to begin with. I just hope you walk away with a few ideas in terms of what is. It's an important concept. I'm not breaking it down and saying that we don't need it. I just think we have to make sure we don't overuse it. At the same time, we use it when applicable because it's there to protect our deen. It's the parameters that keep Islam, that kept Islam till this day the way it is. We still do things very similarly to how he did it, alayhi salatu wasalam. And if you understand this better, then we'll continue to be able to do that, even though we may come up with ways that of performing certain activities and differently than maybe he did them at that time, alayhi salatu wasalam, that more helpful within our context. For example, for the longest time, giving a khutbah in a different language on the minbar than Arabic was considered a bid'ah, and that was the word that was used for the longest time. Still used today if you go to the subcontinent, right? Like right, it's still used. They have to imagine a billion Muslims, close to a billion Muslims listen weekly to a khutbah in a language they don't understand a word of. Right? Understand the problem? Well, because he didn't do it alayhi salatu in another language. He never talked about doing another language ever. But you have no problem because common sense to you, of course. No, it's just, of course. Yeah, but why is this of course, but other something else? So you don't have a criteria. And giving a criteria requires us to study usul al-fiqh and go into a lot of depth in this stuff, which is not maybe set up for this simple hadith commentary course that we're doing. But if you have a basic understanding, then what I want for you and from you is to just slow down before you throw the word around and before you accept it as a label to something. But also remember that it's important to keep the parameters of our deen safe so that we don't end up with something that's very different than what the origin of what he taught alayhi salatu wasalam in practice was, because that's what we want to hold on to. That authenticity is important. So I think we went through all the commentary pieces that I wanted you to know. What is hadith ahad? So I'll quickly do this and then I'll go to the next hadith. So hadith ahad, and I made a slide for you that hopefully will help you understand, is a hadith that refers to a hadith not fulfilling the conditions necessary to be deemed mutawatir. Mutawatir means that it comes to us at a level of authenticity where there is no doubt in its authenticity. There's no doubt because we have people over 10 or 15 in each level of narration, so there's no way they all lied. It's impossible that everyone lied about this, which is what the Quran is. And I will explain mutawatir in a few sessions. I'll explain mutawatir as well. But hadith ahad consists of 3 subclassifications, also relating to the number of narrators. So this is what I want you to know, because this classification is modern, but it's almost universal. Almost all scholars of hadith now use this wording, so I find it to be helpful for you to know it. So a hadith ahad that is mashhur, the first category is mashhur. This refers to a hadith conveyed by 3 or more narrators, but not considered mutawatir. I mean, there's 3 people in each level of the hadith, but not enough to call mutawatir, because mutawatir usually need at least 10. Some scholars are okay with 7. But it's 3, 4, 5, that's called mashhur. Right? It's a famous hadith. The aziz hadith is a hadith conveyed by 2 narrators at every point in the isnad. It's only 2. And al-gharib, a hadith is conveyed by only 1 narrator in each level of the narration. So what is the hadith that we just studied? So Aisha narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. Who narrated from her was al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and narrated from him is Sa'd ibn Ibrahim, and Abi Musa al-Ash'ari, and from Sa'd ibn Ibrahim we have Ibrahim ibn Sa'd's son, and Abdullah ibn Ja'far, and from them each 2 or 3 people, so you have different names. So this hadith is considered what based on that? It's gharib. It's ahad for sure, but it's a gharib. Why? Because you can say, well, we have 2 people here, and 2 people, yeah, but then you have bottlenecks here. So it has to be 2 in each level of the narration. It has to be 2 in order for you to call it aziz. It has to be 3 or more in each level for you to call it mashhur. But even if you have 6 in one of the levels, or 6 in all of the levels, but then one level is only 1 person, it's ahad, and it's gharib. So let's say you have 1,000, from 1,000, and then 1,000, 1,000. 1,000 is more than mutawatir, it's like easy. You have, if one level is 1 person, it's ahad and it's gharib. Because any chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So that's what we need to understand in terms of hadith. This is not to say this hadith is da'if, by the way. No, it's an authentic hadith. It's muttafaq alayhi, narrated by Bukhari and Muslim 100%. I'm explaining to you the terminology of Ahl al-Hadith in terms of how they use these wordings and what they said. And if you go back to the hadith that we talked about last week, I can ask you the same question. I didn't do it in the same way. But here, when I gave the different narrations, it's had, but it's not gharib, because in every level you have a different person. So at the Sahabi level, you have Ibn Umar, and then you have Jabir, Jarir ibn Abdullah, and another narration you have Abu Huraira, and then on the levels behind it, maybe here you have Ikra ibn Khalid in two narrations, but then you have another person, Sa'd ibn Ubaid, and another. So every level you have different people. So when you look at the narrations of the hadith, it doesn't bottleneck at one person. There's always at least two. So this is actually a hadith aziz, the one that we talked about last week. And that, I didn't break it down because actually breaking these things down takes a lot of time. I'm not sure it's going to help you too much, but at least I want you to get basic understanding. Because by the end of this course, I want you to have the skill set to narrate a hadith appropriately, like to sit and narrate the hadith properly and know what you're saying. Like know exactly who Bukhari and Muslim are in contrast to Abu Huraira and Ibn Umar, in contrast to مثلا Mahmoud Shakir and Diyauddin al-A'zami and Sheikh al-Albani. Know the difference between these three people and how to narrate a hadith appropriately and how to talk about the sanad, if it's sahih or hasan or da'if, and what that means, and be able to actually comment on that. Because this is important stuff. Even if you're Googling and looking for things, you should be able to know based on what you find, what hadith you're Maybe not to that detail, but I'll talk a little bit about that. That's mustalah hadith, all right? That's a different course altogether. Sheikh Ziyad is giving that. I may give one at some point, but nothing too soon. Okay, so we'll go to the next hadith. We'll make it a bit quicker, inshallah. What time is it? Okay, we have 10 minutes. طيب عن أبي عبد الله النعمان بن بشير رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا إن ولكل ملك حمى وحمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب رواه البخاري ومسلم. So this is a very, very known hadith, and I'm sure you've read it before. And honestly, it breaks my heart when we go through these hadith in terms of how quickly we run through them, versus how much time they actually require or deserve in terms of explanation. And this is a really beautiful hadith and definitely worth your time in studying and contemplating. I want to make sure you understand certain things about it because it's important, because it helps you with the comprehension of Islam in general. He says halal is clear and haram is clear. So he said alayhi salatu wasalam. They're very clear. They're not difficult to figure out. And between clear halal and clear haram, there are matters that are unclear. And he calls them mushtabihat, that are unknown to most people. لا يعلمهن كثير من. Most people don't know them and don't understand them. فمن اتقى الشبهات. So whoever wearies of these unclear matters or stays away, protects themselves from falling into these unclear matters, فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه. And that person has saved his integrity and state of his religion. He has saved the integrity of his religion and of himself. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. And those who fall into these unclear matters will eventually, see the way that it is linguistically may not have that eventually piece, but it's understood through the Arabic language, that when وَقَعَ, if there's a condition and two verbs that are in the past tense, then there's the concept of futurism in the second verb. وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. Those who fall into shubuhat will eventually fall in haram. كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه. The example he gives alayhi salatu wasalam is a shepherd who has sheep, who is grazing with his sheep, took his sheep to graze in an area that is right beside Hima al-Malik. Hima is the land that is sacred, that is owned by the king, right? And you're told you're not allowed for your sheep to graze in that area over there. So if I know that right over here is where I'm not allowed to bring my sheep to graze, and I bring them and I have them grazed right here, then I'm an imbecile. Because it's just a matter of time before one of them wanders there. And that yushiku an yarta'a fihi. See, yushiku an yarta'a fihi means that very soon, where is it here? Too close to preserve sanctuary, and they will eventually graze in it. Very soon they'll fall into it. ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى. Every king has his sanctuary, has an area where you're not allowed in. ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه. And that area for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the things he said was haram. He said this is haram, this is haram, this is haram. Don't touch these things, don't come near them. Right? So if you're going to be smart, then you stay away from these things. So if you're a shepherd and you have sheep, and you know that this is not, you go and you graze way over there. as far away as possible, so that even if they wander. And the example of sheep here is amazing, and I'll talk about it in a moment. It's a really good example. So sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you couldn't figure out a better example, because the argument that comes is, no, I know what I'm doing. Yeah, I know you know, but do your sheep? You know what you're doing. No, I know where the line is. I'll stay away from the line. Great. You're a shepherd. You can stay away from the line. Barakallah feek. What about your sheep? And then you ask me, well, I don't have sheep. Yeah, exactly. You don't know that you don't have sheep. You do. Of course you have sheep. Or else why would you use this example? The example would make no sense. It makes no sense. You're supposed to stay away from the sanctuary. Not everyone has sheep. But then he used an example where everyone has sheep. So how does this work? Unless there is something that we're not aware of, which is the beauty of this hadith. So, and then he said, alayhi salatu, at the end, indeed, within the heart, within the body, there is a piece of flesh that if it is correct, or if it's reformed, or if it's sound, then the whole body will be sound, and if it's corrupt, then the whole body will be corrupt. And he talks about the heart. So I have a few things I have to point out for you here. So what are the shubuhat? And what is the difference between shubuhat in the hadith and difference of opinion? This is important. Like I differentiate for you between bid'ah and ijtihad that may be controversial, or an opinion that's in the book of fiqh that may not be strong. The same thing is different between shubuhat, this word that he uses, alayhi salatu wasalam, these inclarities or disclarities or unclarities, these things that aren't clear, and there being difference of opinion. He says, alayhi salatu wasalam, halal bayin, haram bayin. There are things that are clearly halal and clearly haram. And there's some things in the middle. What he says right after that is that لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس. A lot of people don't know about them, which means some people do. Which means that some people know about them. So the people who know about them, they can go ahead and do whatever they know. If they know it's haram, they stay away from it. If they know it's not haram, then they don't stay away from it. They go ahead and do it. So what is it that this is talking about? This is talking about in your life when you are running into a certain scenario where you don't know whether it's halal or haram. You just don't know, right? And you don't have access to someone who does know. And you have no way to figure out if it is or if it is not. Or the opinions that exist at the time are so controversial, because there are different types of controversy in Islam when it comes to opinions on fiqh issues. There are issues that are they're controversial, but both sides accept the other opinion. Like both sides see the light in the other opinions. Then you have other controversies where they differ, but they differ on a heavy level. Each group actually sees the other group to be completely mistaken and wrong within an issue of fiqh, right? So when you run into issues like that, and you listen to the arguments, and you could not figure out which is right, I mean, you don't have a consensus among scholarly opinions, or you listen to the arguments and you have no idea which is right and wrong, you can't really process the information, then the smart move is you stay away. This is wara. This is a way to protect your deen. You stay away. It's like the hima, because now you're thinking about the same example. That I don't want to get too close to haram, so I'll stay away, because I never know, if you come close, you may come close again, and come close again. This doesn't mean that, but this is specific into terms of you not being able to know. If you have access to knowledge, then that's a whole different story. Of course, you're going to run into things in your life where you don't have a clear ruling. You have to go in and listen to the argument, look for the evidence, and come up with a ruling. And if that's the case, then you go ahead and do that. And if you get a fatwa that makes sense, then you go ahead and follow it. But if you take a fatwa that doesn't make any sense, or you don't see the evidence, or you listen to it, you are obligated as a Muslim to listen to the argument of the person who's offering you an answer to a question that has lack of clarity attached to it. You are obligated to do that. Like you can't come to the shaykh and say, halal or haram. No. If it's an issue that is talked about within the books of fiqh for a thousand years, and there's 100,000 scholars who are saying it's okay, yeah, it's easy. I can give you the ruling from the book, and you're good to go. But when it's a controversial or contemporary topic that is a little bit in the gray area and there's lack of clarity, you are obligated to know. You have to ask, explain. You're saying it's halal. Why? What is your argument? And then if the argument makes sense, you go for it. If it doesn't make sense and you're still unclear, then that's what you do. You follow this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. You just stay away. You stay away because you don't want to fall, because halal is always clear and haram is always clear. And there's always stuff in the middle. With knowledge, you can figure out what you can go ahead and do and what you don't have. But sometimes there'll be lack of knowledge, lack of access to knowledge, or lack of clarity in terms of the knowledge that's being offered to you. If one of those things are there, then the smart move is to stay away. Now, not staying away doesn't mean that you did something haram. But the hadith is saying if you do that a lot, then you'll eventually fall into haram. If you get into the habit of always playing it really thin, just getting too close to the boundaries, eventually you'll go over. Which is why the last piece of the hadith makes a lot of sense when he talks, alayhi salatu wasalam, about the issue of qalb. I want to talk about sadd al-dhara'i, blocking the means, but we're not going to have enough time. So I'm going to leave that for another. I'll delete it from here and I'll find another way to bring it into hadith, because sadd al-dhara'i, blocking the means, is important. Okay, no, actually, I have to do it now. I have no choice. So here's what it means. So in usul al-fiqh, there is a source of evidence called blocking the means, or sadd al-dhara'i'. It's a very important thing to understand. When an action leads only to haram, or it leads to different things, none of them are helpful, and one of them is haram, for example, or most of the time leads to haram, and when it doesn't, it leads to something that is not necessarily beneficial, you block the means to it. You block the means. You say we're going to stop. We're not going to let people access this to begin with, because it's only leading to an outcome that is harmful to Muslims, or people are falling into haram because of it. This is an important Islamic origin of evidence that is required by scholars to understand, so they can give rulings based on it. Now, this was horribly misused over the last maybe 2 centuries. Horribly misused. I grew up listening to television being haram, radio being haram, internet being haram, satellite TV being haram, and then all the Shia who give the fatwa had internet TV, satellite TVs, and all that stuff in their homes a couple of years later. And the reason they gave these fatwas up front is because, like, we think this is going to open the door for a lot of problems. And they were right. It opened the door to a lot of problems, but a lot of benefit came from it as well. When the action or the thing that you're looking at, whatever it is, the matter at hand, can lead to good and bad, then you can't use this logic for it by saying we're going to cut it because there's bad. There's bad from everything. Almost every behavior, everything you get into in life can lead to a bad outcome. So that's not a sound logic at all. It has to be that this action, we looked at it, it never leads to any good. It only leads to harm, or maybe something that's useless. In that case, we block the means. But when there's usefulness to it, but there's also the potential of uselessness, or there's harm to it, then we have to regulate, moderate. We have to educate. We have to make sure people understand how to deal with it. We don't block it and call it haram. When you do that, people start taking the word haram lightly, because you're throwing it out too much. These words have to be thrown out properly. Yes?
I just have a question about so in the book of some of the wordings, like they were specifically talking about that, saying that sometimes people will ask, okay, if this is haram, what give me an alternative. And sometimes, because we're following our deen, there is no alternative. Like
Sure.
It is that way. That's the way.
Yeah.
The deen is the way of Islam. So what's the solution then? In this context, I'm not blocking the means. It's just like this is the only way that's there, because that's the deen.
If something is only leading to haram, then we don't have to offer an alternative.
Yeah.
We don't have to offer an alternative. There's no need for that. Like, we should have an alternative in terms of what people should be doing, but we don't have to. If it's clear that this behavior or this activity or engaging in this in this lifestyle will only lead to harm or only lead to haram eventually, there's no other alternative. Like, it doesn't take you anywhere else. Then we block it, and we don't really need an alternative to it. Honestly, I think it's an important part of Islam. You accept it because there's a lot of things that are haram that we don't necessarily have alternatives for. He said, subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's not helpful, and we stopped doing it. The problem is that this was used too much. It was used so much that people started to think that every time something is called haram, it's just being that. Like smoking, for example. So smoking basically became less of a problem because the same person who called TV haram called smoking haram. They find out later that TV isn't haram, so maybe this is when smoking, there is no benefit for smoking. Like, there is no benefit to it. And if you call about the nicotine will give you a patch and you get all the nicotine in the world. There's no benefit in the actual tar. There's no benefit in the carcinogens that you're inhaling. The benefit is in the nicotine. The nicotine is easy. We can get that from a lot of other stuff, and there are pure sources of it. So there's no benefit to it at all. So this is very simple in terms of understanding it. I'm not saying you need the same logic for smoking, but I'm saying that this is an example of a problem that we ran into. So it's important to understand what sadd al-dhara'i is. I would say that it's worth your time at one point to study Matin in Usul al-Fiqh. So you go through sadd al-dhara'i, understand the examples of the scholars which madhahib used it, how they used it initially. It's a very, very useful tool for scholars to have, but it's also important because you can't, based on this hadith, just look, oh, I'm not sure about this, haram. Not sure about this, haram. No. Slow down. Slow down. First of all, لا يعلمهن كثير من, many people don't know. So those many people, this hadith by the merit of him using that word is personal, is for you. It's not a public hadith. It's not a hadith that is supposed to be used for people to practice things publicly, meaning I'm not going to say, well, we don't know, so it's haram. No, if you're standing there telling the people, you should be amongst the few who do know. Like you should know. And if you don't, then that's a problem. Because this hadith is for you as you go through your life. You go through your life and sometimes you run into a situation where you don't know what the answer to this issue is. You look into it, you can't figure it out. You're not getting answers that make sense to you. So what do you do? Then you listen to the hadith, you stay away. You stay away for the safety of your deen and the safety of the integrity of your deen. That if you do know and you find that out, then that's fine. We're supposed to know. We're supposed to learn and be, yes. Very different. It's a bit different because the context there I have to, yeah. Sure, yeah. What was your question?
The prohibition, would that be considered something for Canada, like removing alcohol from society altogether?
Well, for them maybe. For us it's because it's haram. Like alcohol would be. Yeah, for them it would be. And they use blocking the means. Like, by the way, blocking the means as a philosophical concept used in legal systems is there. Like, if something only leads to harm, then we block it or we stop it. So yeah, they would use it here if there wasn't a lot of money behind it, they probably would have used it. Same thing goes for the tobacco companies, and same thing goes for the drug trade around the world, is that if they had the ability to block the means, they would have, because there's no benefit in it altogether. But the difference between, when you talk about shubuhat, this hadith talks about, is not talking about specifically sadd al-dhara'a, but sadd al-dhara'a was taken from this concept, that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you're unclear on something, and you can't see benefit in it, you don't do it. But when you do know that there is benefit, you're able to establish that this can be beneficial, then you don't have the right to stop it just because there's a possibility of harm. There's a possibility of harm in everything. So it makes, and that was the idea of being extra conservative and making things haram just to be safe does not work. It's just as bad as making things halal. It's just as bad. It's detrimental for societies, and regardless of the direction you go in. So you have to be very accurate. This hadith is mostly for you as an individual, as you go through your life, to know what to do and to learn a bit of wara'. Wara' means there's this new controversial issue. It's contemporary. I've listened. I don't know what to do. I don't have clarity. Then what do? You listen to this. You go ahead and you stay a step back and you stay away from that line. Because you don't know, you can't figure out why, because the line is just obscured in this example, right? Halal bayyin, haram bayyin. The lines are clear in general, but sometimes it's not clear. So I don't know where the line is. I've looked into this. I've asked people. I don't know where the line is. So you're gonna what? You're gonna come stand right here and just pray that you're standing on the right side of the line. Go stand over there so that you make sure that you're not close to it, because you don't want to be in the sanctuary. You don't want to be over. If you go to Allah subhanahu, you've never crossed a haram line. You're very safe. Even if you didn't do a lot of qiyam al-layl and siyam, you just never crossed a red line. Never did something that you shouldn't have done. It's a big deal within the deen to understand. What is the qalb? So I made for you this. I gave a series called The Empty Space. For sure, if you want to know a little bit more about issues of spirituality and the terminology there and the nomenclature, go to the series. It's online. I think it's online. Yes, online. It's like 7 episodes or so. And in that, I talk about the different. So the spirit is a ruh. The soul is the nafs. Consciousness is fu'ad. Subconscious is the heart, is the qalb. Now, the subconscious. And then you have the conscious, which is dhamir, or nafs al-lawama, the nature of the soul, convictions of the soul. These are different, these are words, they have different usages. But just to kind of understand that there's different words, they're not the same. The spirit does not equal the soul, does not equal the fu'ad, does not equal the qalb. They're different things. And they have different usages in the Quran, and they have different uses for you in terms of what you're going to do with it. So what do you need to know from this hadith? This is you see this little cycle over here? This cycle helps you understand the qalb. Your thoughts will affect your feelings and your behaviors, right? If you think positively, it'll make you behave positively and feel positively. Your feelings affect your thoughts and your behaviors. If you feel good, then you think good and you behave good. Your behaviors affect your thoughts and your feelings. So if you do good things, it helps you think good things and feel good things, and vice versa. This is a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle, however you want. If you sit with a psychiatrist in a room, they'll draw it for you and just tell you, here's give you a piece of paper that is ripped out of a notebook, and here, live your life based on this. This is something that's been talked about in over 1,200 years ago in books of tazkiyah and suluk. It's very simple. This is what you use. Now, how does the qalb work? You understand how the qalb works outside of this. So the qalb is like this big melting pot. It's just this melting pot where everything, all the input just goes right into this huge melting pot. Everything you hear, everything you see, everything you think, everything just happens in this big, and it's just been stirred around and stirred around. And then you get output. The output are the feelings that you have. It's the feelings you have are the output. You can't control, see within this cycle, you control this 100%. You control this between 60 and 80% depending on how old you are and whether you have any degrees of OCD or ADHD or any other problems. And feelings you almost control 0%. You can't control you can't say, I'm going to love fulan today or love, you can when you say that, you can control your behavior, like how you'll speak to them, what you'll do to them, but you can't control how you feel inside of you. It's impossible. It's just a feeling. But what controls feelings, the heart does, the subconsciousness does. It's something, it's one level of consciousness that's a little bit lower than this superficial brain that's thinking and saying things and interacting with people in front of it and contemplating thoughts. It's one level lower. What goes into the heart? Your thoughts, what you see and what you hear. Actions can be things you do. Actions can also be what you subject yourself to. Actions can be something that I do, but actions can also be what I subject myself to. Like what am I going to listen to? Because I can choose whether I listen to this stuff or I don't listen to it. I look at something, that's an action. I can choose whether to look at this or not to look at this. So actions aren't just active behaviors, it's also what you subject yourself to. So everything you hear, everything you see, everything you think, stirred up here, and then pushed out into feelings. Those feelings you can't directly control. However, you can indirectly control by understanding how this works, understanding what goes into the heart. If you struggle with something, hear good things about it, see good things about it, think good things about it, do that for a while, let it stir up nicely, and then you'll see the output. You can't listen to haram, look at haram, think haram, and then suddenly it's going to put out halal. No, it's going to put out whatever it is that you put there for a long time. It's very simple. But that's why he says, alayhi salatu fil jasad mudghah, there's a piece of flesh. If it's reformed, if it's fixed, the whole thing works. And if it's corrupt, the whole thing is corrupt because it's just taking in input from everything. You choose what input it's going to get. You get to choose that piece. And you're just putting it in, and then it processes it, and then it gives you a feeling. And that feeling will make your life either easier or more difficult. Right? If you love Islam, it's easier to adhere, and if you don't like it, then it's more difficult to adhere. And it's only a matter of time before you lose your energy, your motivation, your grit because you don't like it. And when people say, I don't like it, I'm like, I understand. Very good, you identified a feeling. Now, tell me how you can influence that feeling. And someone said, well, no, I don't like it. I understand, but how can you influence that feeling? If the answer is no, I can't influence that feeling, that's a problem. Then you don't understand how you work on the inside. Of course you can influence a feeling, of course. I'll end with this silly story that I'll tell you. It is a silly story. And it exists in every, you know the story. Adib knows the story before I say it. The silly story exists in every single culture. I like the story that comes from the Indian culture because I thought it was the most relevant. But you can find it in almost every other culture. A lady gets married, lives in her house with her husband. Yeah, you know the story. And in the house is her mother-in-law, right? And that's always a good recipe, isn't it? It's always a smart move from the. So of course she doesn't like her mother-in-law. Mother-in-law makes her life very difficult. She's very young, so she goes to the Attar. She goes to the book, the hadith, the stories in Al-Aghani Al-Asfahani, and he narrates it from one of the scholars from Samarkand who brought it from India, and just where the story came from. So he points out that, so the Attar hears, the guy, the pharmacist, the botanist, is hearing from this young lady that she wants a untraceable poison to give her mother-in-law so she can die, so she can live with her husband happily and no one can catch her. So he says, for sure, no problem, easy. I have something better for you. Here's this container of zayt. Here you go, take this. She doesn't have to eat it. Just massage her back with this for 30 days in a row, and she will die, and no one will know anything. Everyone will think you're a saint, so this is fine. So she's happy. She takes it, and she goes and does this. After 25 days, she comes back to the Attar, and in tears, begging him, please give me an antidote to reverse what it is doing. Please, I don't want her to die anymore. So he asks her why. He said, well, after doing this, I love her. I would basically massage her shoulders, and we would chat, and after a while I got to know her, and I love her, and I don't want her to die. So he said, well, you think I gave you poison? Are you an idiot? I never gave you poison. I just gave you zayt zaytun to put on your mother's back. It's a really silly story, but the simple understanding of it is that something you don't like, or someone you don't like, it's not embedded, it's not engraved in stone. It's something that can change. A lot of things can change it. You choose whether you're willing to actually go ahead and try and change it or not. But understanding that that takes time and that you don't always have full control over everything happening. So when he talked about the sheep, and alayhi sallam in the hadith, he's talking about the fact that it takes you a while to get everything in order. Sometimes the input is not 100% halal, so a little bit of the input is haram. So a feeling of yours may be one of that stray sheep that just goes into that makes you end up just crossing the line. You control yourself for sure, but because there's so much input coming in, that input will dictate how well you're able to stay away from a certain thing versus fall into it. You have to make sure that there's a buffer zone. Make sure there's a buffer zone between you and haram, because your heart is taking in all these things, and the qalb, because it's taking in all this input and stirring everything up, mixing it up, you may end up one day with an output not too great. You'll see the output is not great. Okay, stop, I need to fix this and go back. But now that the output is not great, you could easily fall into a problem. You can make a mistake during those minutes where the output is not great within that day. You end up doing something wrong. And if you're too close to haram, now it's too easy. You just take one step and you're on the other side. But if you're way over there and you take a step in the wrong direction, you're still safe. You're still safe. But he's talking alayhi salatu wasalam, the fact that you can't account for every variable. Sometimes there's a sheep. There's one who'll just end up going astray and you're accountable for him. So yes, there's sheep. There's the nafs and the spirit and the qalb. There's all this stuff going on inside. And sometimes you can't account for all of them. And sometimes it's just been a bad week. Too much bad input. The output isn't great. You make a mistake. Stay away from haram so that your mistake isn't a big deal. If you're standing right at the red line, then your mistake could be detrimental, could be catastrophic for yourself. And that's why the beauty, the profoundness of this hadith, I think, would be very important. I thought that was helpful for you. We'll end with that, inshallah. I will make sure that at the end of each session, there's 5 minutes for questions. So I'll give 5 minutes for questions. You're welcome to leave, obviously. You don't have to stay for them. But if you have a question, you're welcome to raise your hand. And if we can maybe even keep questions in the general till the end of the sessions is easier. I'm a little bit of a didactic. I just like running through all of it. And then at the end of it, if you have something, you can come back and just...